Jake glanced around the small conference room, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. He'd been chosen as Earth's official diplomatic representative to the Braxians, a species so advanced and mysterious, humans barely knew anything about them. Sure, he'd been trained, coached, and even drilled on Brassian customs, but here he was, moments from stepping onto their planet, with barely an idea of what to expect. "Remember, Jake," his superior's voice echoed in his mind. "Keep it professional, stay calm, and above all, be sensitive to their cultural nuances. The Braxians have some, well, unique expressions." "Unique expressions?" Jake had asked at the time, curious. His superior had just nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes. Just don't assume anything." So Jake had brushed it off, thinking it was some vague warning about etiquette. Now, as he checked over his neatly pressed suit and smoothed down his hair, he felt a pang of regret for not pressing harder on that last point. What could they possibly mean by unique expressions? As the shuttle descended, Jake was brought out of his thoughts by the bright lights of the Brassian capital shimmering below. A sleek-looking Brassian, tall and slightly iridescent, with calm, unblinking eyes, waited at the platform as he stepped out, giving him a polite nod. "Greetings, human diplomat Jake. We are honored by your presence. Please, follow me to the Hall of Unity." The Braxian's voice was soft but firm, with an accent that was slightly musical. Jake followed, noting the grand architecture around him, towers that twisted into the sky, bridges that seemed to float. The hall was impressive, to say the least. It was built of silver and crystalline materials, reflecting light in soft, prismatic hues. A group of dignitaries stood at the entrance, their colorful robes swirling as they turned to greet him with wide, serene smiles. "Greetings, Ambassador Jake," one of the Braxians began, their voice melodious. "You come to us at a very important time. We look forward to seeing Earth's commitment to unity." Jake smiled politely, trying to look as diplomatic as possible. "I'm honored to be here, and I hope my visit strengthens our understanding and cooperation." One of the Braxians, a dignitary with a purple shimmer to her skin, leaned closer. "We Braxians believe in total cultural exchange," she said, her gaze steady and unblinking. "Our customs can be quite intimate." Jake's mind raced. What exactly did she mean by intimate? Before he could respond, another Brassian joined in, nodding solemnly. "Yes, a commitment to mutual understanding. This is our way." Jake's cheeks flushed. Was it just him, or was everyone here overly serious? He glanced back at the purple-skinned dignitary, who was looking at him with a small, pleased smile. Yes, of course," he said finally, figuring he'd have to take everything in stride. He'd handle it like any other diplomatic mission, formally, professionally. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were hinting at something extra. Then came the moment that shifted his entire perspective. The main dignitary, silver-skinned, a slight bow to her posture, stepped forward, holding a delicate object in her hands. It was small, carved from a glittering, glass-like material, and shaped like a key? Jake couldn't be sure, but the way she cradled it gave it a weight he wasn't certain he understood. "Our tradition is sacred," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with reverence. "And we have but one question." Jake waited, leaning slightly forward. The dignitary looked him directly in the eye. "So you'll put that dick inside of us?" The silence that followed was absolute. Jake's brain seemed to stop for a second, unable to process what he'd just heard. "Put what inside of where?" "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" he stammered, struggling to keep his face neutral. The Braxians around him nodded, as if his question was a perfectly reasonable response. "This artifact, which you have brought from Earth as a token, shall be placed within us. It is our ancient custom." Jake's mind raced, but he forced himself to nod as he tried to come to grips with what he thought they meant. This couldn't possibly be what he thought it was, could it? I suppose I can, handle that," he said hesitantly, which earned him a round of approving nods and murmurs. He started sweating as he considered how exactly he was supposed to carry this out, whatever this was. The dignitaries moved to form a circle around him, murmuring phrases in their language, which, in his jittery state, sounded like an alien prayer. They clearly believed this was a monumental gesture on his part. Ambassador Jake, this symbolizes our deepest bond. We Braxians honor you for it, the purple-skinned dignitary added, with what looked suspiciously like a wink. Or maybe his imagination was just running away with him. Thank you. I'm honored, truly, he replied, attempting to sound formal, though his voice cracked a bit at the end. And yet all Jake could think was, how did I get myself into this? He was committed now, in more ways than one, it seemed. And judging by their expressions, the Braxians were convinced he knew exactly what he was agreeing to. He'd just have to figure it out, ideally without making a fool of himself. Jake's palms were sweating as he followed the Brassian dignitaries through the towering hall. Each step felt heavier, and his mind raced with scenarios, none of them comforting. Did they really mean what he thought they did? Putting that inside of them. His diplomatic training hadn't prepared him for anything remotely like this. Ahead of him, the dignitaries, led by the purple-skinned Brassian, moved in a stately procession, heads held high, their shimmering robes flowing like water. She glanced back at him now and then, with what he could swear was a playful glint in her eye. Jake gulped, feeling the weight of all their expectations. As they reached the grand room at the end of the hall, Jake realized it was even more ornate than the last. Polished stone floors gleamed underfoot, and banners woven with intricate alien symbols hung from the walls. In the center of the room, a large, carved pedestal stood bathed in soft, pulsating light. The lead dignitary stepped forward, motioning toward the pedestal with reverence. "This is where the ceremony will take place," she said, her tone hushed. "The artifact you brought with you, the Dick, as you call it, will be placed here, in the sacred chamber." Jake's throat went dry. "Right, the artifact," he echoed weakly, glancing down at the small, nondescript case he'd been handed at the start of the mission. So this Dick was just an object? His initial, panicked assumption seemed increasingly absurd, but a niggling doubt still lingered. Why had they used that specific word? The dignitaries all nodded, clearly pleased by his participation. "This is a monumental occasion," one of them said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "No other species has ever agreed to conduct this ceremony with us." Jake's face burned. He was beginning to feel like he was part of some cosmic practical joke. But he forced himself to focus. If they wanted the artifact placed in this pedestal, then that's what he'd do, he thought. He could manage that. He just needed to stay professional, ignore his overactive imagination, and avoid jumping to the worst conclusions. The purple-skinned Brassian gestured for him to approach the pedestal. "Please, Ambassador Jake. When you're ready, place it in." As Jake stepped forward, the other Braxians gathered in a semicircle around him, their expressions respectful but expectant. Jake took a deep breath, hoping this would be the last of the misunderstandings. With deliberate care, he opened the small case and removed the artifact, a smooth, metallic object with engravings that looked vaguely ceremonial, though he couldn't decipher their meaning. Whatever it represented, it seemed important to them. "Here goes nothing," he muttered under his breath as he leaned forward and carefully placed the artifact on the pedestal. The Braxian's eyes widened, and a ripple of excited murmurs went through the group. He stepped back, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Surely, this was all they meant by putting the Dick inside of us. The lead dignitary clapped her hands softly, and the rest joined in, their expressions filled with genuine admiration. "You have honored us greatly," she said, bowing. "The commitment to place your essence within our hearts speaks volumes of Earth's dedication." Jake blinked, not quite sure he'd heard her correctly. I'm glad you feel that way. It's, an honor for Earth, too." The dignitaries began to whisper among themselves, and Jake strained to catch fragments of their conversation. Phrases like true courage and unquestionable devotion floated through the air, only adding to his confusion. Had he misinterpreted their ritual, Or were they the ones adding more meaning than he intended? The purple-skinned dignitary stepped forward once more. Her eyes shone as she looked at him, and she seemed to hesitate before speaking, as if gathering her thoughts. Ambassador Jake, you have shown a depth of connection beyond our wildest expectations. But, as per our custom, there is still one more step. Jake's heart skipped a beat. One more step. He'd been so close to thinking he'd handled the whole situation without a hitch. Right. Of course, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Just, walk me through it, and I'll do my best. The dignitaries all seemed to lean in closer, their faces alight with an odd mix of reverence and curiosity. Ambassador, the final act is simple, the purple-skinned dignitary said softly. To seal this union, you will press your hand upon the sacred stone, as a way of imprinting your essence upon our people. Jake's mind spun. Imprinting my essence? He echoed, half to himself. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what that entailed. Yes, she replied, her voice earnest. By doing so, you complete the symbolic exchange. It is not just an artifact you leave with us, but a piece of your spirit, your dick, as you say it. It will be embedded in our memory for generations. Jake's face turned an impressive shade of red. They couldn't possibly understand what that word meant on Earth, could they? Or maybe they did, and they'd chosen it as some kind of cosmic irony. Either way, he was in too deep to back out now. He took a deep breath, willing himself to stay composed. A handprint, he thought, that's all. He could manage that without overthinking it. Slowly, he reached out and placed his hand on the smooth, cool surface of the stone. A faint hum filled the air as his palm connected with it, and for a moment, he felt a strange warmth pulse from the stone and through his hand. His mind was flooded with images, stars, unfamiliar landscapes, the faces of aliens, all flashing by in a blink, leaving him feeling dazed yet oddly peaceful. The dignitaries let out a collective sigh, a sound of genuine contentment that Jake hadn't expected. When he pulled his hand away, he noticed the faint outline of his palm left glowing on the stone, slowly fading. The lead dignitary smiled, clearly moved. It is done, she said reverently. Your essence will live on within our people, forever bonded in unity. Jake blinked, feeling a mix of relief and mild embarrassment. Well, I hope it brings our worlds closer together. The dignitaries nodded approvingly, exchanging smiles. As he stepped back, Jake had the unsettling feeling that he'd somehow managed to misunderstand something again. But judging by their reactions, they seemed more than satisfied with his contribution. And as they led him out of the chamber, their warm farewells echoing around him, Jake realized he probably wouldn't be forgetting this experience anytime soon. Nor, it seemed, would they. Jake barely had time to catch his breath after the ceremony before he found himself surrounded by a small group of Brassian dignitaries, all of them wearing expressions of curiosity, admiration, and something he couldn't quite place. He'd done his duty, hadn't he? Placed the artifact, left his essence, through a simple handprint. It should be over. But the Braxians seemed more fascinated than ever. Ambassador Jake, the purple-skinned dignitary murmured, almost dreamily. You are truly unlike any other. Thanks, Jake replied, a little awkwardly. He wasn't sure what he'd done to deserve the compliment, but he figured it was best to play along. It's an honor to be here. The Braxians exchanged a series of subtle glances, as if agreeing on something unspoken. Then, one of them, a dignitary with a deep green shimmer to his skin, stepped forward, holding a small, brightly colored flower, its petals swirling in the air as though alive. Please accept this humble gift as a token of our appreciation, the green-skinned Brassian said, his voice warm and sincere. In Brassian culture, this flower symbolizes admiration and the desire for continued closeness. Jake felt a slight flush creep up his neck as he accepted the flower, struggling to maintain his diplomatic composure. Thank you. I appreciate the gesture, he said, hoping he didn't sound as flustered as he felt. But the gifts didn't stop there. One by one, the Braxians came forward, each offering a small token of affection, delicate beads, shimmering stones, intricately woven cloths. And with each gift, their words grew more intimate. They spoke of his bravery, his open heart, his unique presence that had touched their lives. He tried to remind himself that this was probably just Brassian custom, but he couldn't ignore the way they lingered as they handed over each gift, the soft, appreciative looks they gave him. Was this how they treated all diplomats? He wondered, growing more and more uncertain. The dignitary with the purple shimmer leaned close, her eyes sparkling. You have captured the hearts of many here, Ambassador Jake. Some of us hoped we might spend time with you to further deepen our understanding of Earth's customs. Jake's mind stuttered. Spend time? Further deepen? His brain immediately jumped to a range of scenarios, none of which he could imagine explaining to his superiors. But before he could stammer out a reply, the Braxians seemed to take his hesitation as encouragement. You must know, she continued, her voice a soft, almost melodic whisper, that your willingness to put that dick inside of us, so freely, so generously, is deeply meaningful to us all. Jake choked, nearly dropping the flower. He managed to keep his voice steady, though barely. Well, I didn't realize it was so significant to you. I mean, of course I'm glad it means so much. They nodded, expressions radiating approval, but the effect was almost overwhelming. With every passing second, he felt more and more like some kind of interstellar heartthrob. He tried to remind himself that these were simply customs and traditions, but his heart kept pounding, caught up in the strange and flattering attentions of the Braxians. The dignitary with green skin leaned in, a smile playing on his lips. Ambassador, we would be honored if you joined us for a private gathering this evening. A small celebration to, as you say, break the ice. We could discuss our customs, and yours. Jake's internal alarms were going off. His initial thought was to decline as diplomatically as possible, but when he looked around, he saw the hopeful, almost eager faces of the Braxians, each of them seemingly awaiting his answer with genuine anticipation. He cleared his throat. I'd be happy to join you all, he said finally, feeling the weight of their approving looks. They seemed delighted, and a wave of approving murmurs rippled through the group. Oh, wonderful! The purple-skinned dignitary clasped her hands, her eyes gleaming. We look forward to sharing our most cherished traditions with you, Ambassador. Perhaps we will learn much from each other tonight. Jake's mind scrambled to process her words. What exactly did cherished traditions mean? He hoped they weren't about to unveil another round of cryptic idioms or symbolic gestures. Still, he nodded politely, hiding his apprehension as best he could. He'd been trained to handle unexpected situations, he reminded himself. This was just another part of the job. As the Braxians led him away to a smaller, more intimate chamber filled with soft lighting and cushions arranged in inviting circles, he found himself wondering if he'd ever felt this out of his depth. The Braxians settled around him, each one leaning in attentively, their expressions open and inviting. Please, Ambassador, the purple-skinned dignitary began, her voice low. We would be deeply honored to hear more about Earth's relational practices. We understand that humans value deep, meaningful connections. We, too, are devoted to forging such bonds. Jake blinked, trying to determine whether he was reading too much into her words. Well, yes, humans do value meaningful relationships, he said, choosing his words carefully. It's important to have connections built on trust and understanding. The Braxians nodded solemnly, looking deeply moved by his response. Yes, precisely, the green-skinned dignitary said, his voice filled with admiration. To share one's essence, to trust another fully is sacred. Your willingness to put that dick inside of us is not just a gesture, but a powerful commitment. Jake tried not to wince as they repeated the phrase. He wanted to clarify. Desperately wanted to clarify, but wasn't sure how to address the misunderstanding without causing offense. So he forced a smile, nodding along, feeling like he was walking a diplomatic tightrope. We would love to experience more of Earth's unique ways of bonding. Another Brassian added softly, leaning closer. Perhaps tonight, you might show us? Jake's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't tell if they were being serious or if this was another cultural quirk he didn't understand. He took a deep breath, deciding it was time to bring a little clarity. Well, he began awkwardly. Earth's customs might be different from what you're expecting. We don't actually have a tradition of, putting a personal artifact inside of someone. That's not really what we mean by connection. The Braxians exchanged puzzled glances, and Jake braced himself, wondering if he just committed some massive faux pas. But then they smiled, their expressions softening. Ah, the purple-skinned dignitary said gently. We understand, Ambassador Jake. Perhaps the words differ, but the sentiment remains. Your customs may differ, but the willingness to bond, to share, is what matters. Jake nodded, feeling slightly relieved. Maybe they hadn't entirely understood, but at least he'd managed to clear up the most embarrassing part. For the first time, he allowed himself to relax a bit. The Braxians continued to ask him questions about Earth, innocent, genuine questions about human relationships, trust, and the nature of connection. They seemed captivated by his answers, each one of them listening intently as he spoke. And slowly, Jake began to feel a strange kinship forming, despite all the bizarre misunderstandings. As the evening went on, he realized that, despite their cultural differences, the Braxians weren't so different from humans. They valued connection, trust, and respect. And though their customs were strange, their sincerity was unmistakable. By the end of the night, Jake found himself smiling. Jake's last night on the Brassian planet had him feeling strangely at ease, especially after the intense misunderstandings he'd been through. By now, he'd figured out that the phrase, "Put that dick inside of us," was simply a wildly mistranslated idiom referring to the gesture of leaving a symbolic piece of oneself in their sacred chamber. It was a relief to finally understand that he hadn't agreed to any outlandish custom or some elaborate courting ritual. But still, he was ready to wrap up the mission and head back to Earth with a story he wasn't quite sure he'd ever have the words to explain. Morning came, and Jake prepared for the departure ceremony, a final exchange to seal the bond between Earth and the Brassian people. He walked into the ceremonial hall with its grand arches and mosaic skylight, feeling the gravity of the moment. The Braxians were lined up, looking more solemn than ever, each dignitary holding a small token, flowers, beads, even a peculiar device that looked like a musical instrument with shimmering strings. The lead Brassian, with her dignified purple hue, stepped forward. She held out a small, silver ring with an intricate pattern carved into its surface. Ambassador Jake, as you prepare to leave, we wish to honor you with one final token of our appreciation. Jake took the ring, marveling at its delicate design. Thank you. It's truly beautiful, he replied, slipping it onto his finger. The Braxians watched him intently, their faces radiating approval, as if he'd passed some silent test. We will cherish the memory of your visit, Ambassador Jake, the purple-skinned dignitary said, her voice filled with sincerity. Your willingness to share your essence so freely with us has marked a new chapter in our understanding of humans. Jake felt his face flush slightly, still a bit embarrassed over the way they'd all taken his willingness so earnestly. He was about to thank them and make his way to the shuttle when a young Brassian stepped forward, her voice hesitant but eager. Ambassador Jake, she began. We have a request. If Earth allows it, we would like you to take a small part of us back with you. Jake's brows lifted. A part of you? How do you mean? The young Brassian glanced nervously at her colleagues, as if searching for encouragement, then continued. It is customary for visitors to carry a piece of our people's spirit when they depart, symbolizing a mutual exchange of essences. He glanced around the room, trying to gauge the expressions on the other Braxians' faces, and noticed that they were all nodding approvingly. The lead dignitary stepped forward, clarifying. It's not as literal as it may sound. Our spirit can be carried in this. She held out a small, shimmering orb, glowing faintly in the light. Oh, Jake breathed in relief, smiling as he took the orb. It's beautiful. I'd be honored to carry this back to Earth. The Braxian seemed genuinely moved by his response. A ripple of satisfied murmurs filled the hall, and Jake couldn't help but smile at their warmth and sincerity. For all the oddities and mistranslations, the Braxians clearly valued connection, and he felt honored to have represented Earth in a way that seemed meaningful to them. As he held the orb, it suddenly emitted a soft hum, and Jake felt a strange but comforting warmth spread through his hand, as if the object were alive. He glanced around, noticing the Braxians watching him with expressions of reverence and approval, and realized that this was probably their way of showing gratitude. "You have completed the ceremony, Ambassador Jake," the purple-skinned dignitary said, a note of finality in her voice. "Your visit has left a lasting impression upon our people. And we hope that, one day, you might return to deepen our bonds even further." Jake smiled, feeling a genuine connection to these strange and thoughtful beings. "I'd like that very much," he replied. "Thank you for everything." With that, Jake bid his farewells, shaking hands and exchanging nods of respect with each Brassian dignitary. As he made his way to the shuttle, he couldn't help but glance down at the small orb in his hand, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. This mission had been full of misunderstandings, yes, but it had also been a success. Somehow, in the midst of all the cultural confusion, they'd managed to build a bridge between their worlds. As the shuttle door closed behind him, Jake settled into his seat, taking a deep breath. The orb in his hand continued to emit a soft glow, a reminder of the strange and unforgettable experience he'd just had. He couldn't wait to tell the folks back on Earth about his adventures. Well, maybe with a few details left out. Once the shuttle was in orbit, Jake activated the comms to make his initial report. His superior's face appeared on the screen, looking expectant. "Ambassador Jake, good to see you. I trust everything went smoothly?" Jake hesitated, trying to find the words. "Let's just say it was an enlightening experience." His superior's brow furrowed. "Enlightening? Care to elaborate?" Jake chuckled, glancing down at the orb. "Well, let's just say the Braxians have a unique way with words. There were a few misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" His superior looked concerned. Jake laughed, shaking his head. "Nothing serious. In fact, I'd say it went pretty well. They were very hospitable." The superior raised an eyebrow. "And the phrase they kept using? Put that dick inside of us? Did you get any clarity on that?" Jake fought the urge to laugh again, nodding. "Turns out, it was just a mistranslation. It was a cultural idiom about placing an artifact in their sacred chamber as a symbolic gesture. Nothing to worry about." His superior sighed in relief. "Good to know. And you completed the gesture, I assume?" Jake glanced at the glowing orb, feeling a mix of pride and amusement. "Yes, I completed it. Let's just say Earth's essence is now firmly embedded in Brassian memory." The superior's lips quirked in a faint smile. "Well done, Ambassador Jake. Sounds like you handled yourself well." Jake nodded, the weight of the mission finally settling into a sense of satisfaction. "Thank you. It was definitely an experience I won't forget." As the call ended, Jake leaned back in his seat, feeling a deep sense of relief. He'd navigated a mission that was as perplexing as it was humorous, and he managed to leave with both Earth's dignity and his own intact, mostly. Holding the orb, he found himself chuckling at the thought of how absurd the whole experience had been. But maybe that was the beauty of diplomacy, he mused, bridging gaps and finding common ground, even when the language made no sense at all. He stared out the window, watching the stars blur as the shuttle picked up speed. Maybe, just maybe, he'd find himself back here one day, sharing another round of cultural exchanges with his Brassian friends. After all, they seemed to have a lot more to say, even if half of it might require a translator. And with that thought, Jake finally relaxed, feeling, for the first time, like he truly left a piece of himself among the stars.